really okay with this.
Sometimes old soldiers just fade away.
It feels strange saying that the boys of all TV shows has skipped over characters because they were quote-unquote too horrifying for live-action television, doesn't it? After all, we've got folks like Dognaught, Bushmaster, and Black Hole in this franchise, and we see Homelander committing war crimes on the regular. But believe it or not, there are even worse characters in the comics that were left on the cutting room floor because including them, even in just a suggestive joke, would have been one step too far. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at 15 such characters who could have been included in Amazon MGM's flagship superhero franchise, but were benched because of the legal complications they'd put the company in. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. It's going to be a fun one. The real Black Noir. In the show, Black Noir is a tragic figure who's later replaced by a bumbling method actor Soup because his brand is worth more than his life. Noir 1 was nearly as arrogant as Noir 2 in his youth, but after he caught a brutal beatdown at the hands of Soldier Boy, he became someone we could actually sympathize with, brutal execution tactics notwithstanding. Noir 2 is just a prima donna who wants to be able to strut his stuff, but all of that pales in comparison to the real Black Noir. In the comics, he's the ultimate horror. A secret clone of Homelander created as a failsafe contingency should Vought ever feel the need to send the original on vacation to Belize. He was planted in the Seven and spent years working alongside the very target he'd been assigned to destroy. Because OG Noir was so close to Homelander and was never given the chance to kill him because he never overstepped his authority, he was driven insane, which caused him to do some unspeakable things. Noir took to dressing as Homelander and was the actual instigator of all the acts that were later attributed to him, including the assault on Becca Butcher and cannibalizing developing infants. And he did it all just to gaslight Homelander into thinking he was going crazy, which itself is a little crazy, considering Homie once pulled the most disgusting switcheroo on Queen Maeve with his clone best friend. Black Noir orchestrated his descent into madness just to get the kill order, and because he never got it, he did things that even the most lenient of censor boards would never allow on television. Jack from Jupiter. While he's never shown in the live-action adaptation of The Boys, except for a sleazy tribute, OG 7 member Jack from Jupiter does make an appearance in an episode of The Boys Diabolical. In that episode, he, Homelander, and Queen Maeve were about to induct another Soup into the Heroes Hall of Fame, but when that guy goes ballistic thanks to a drug cocktail Frenchie cooked up and kills another Soup along with himself, Jack was the first to point out that a Kroll ship had appeared in the skies and that Galaxia had returned. Lies, of course, but that scene alone should tell you the kind of hedonistic monster he truly was, and the comics go disturbingly deep into that. In the comics, Jack often indulges in narcotics and has an unsettling fascination with transsexual prostitutes. He even sleeps with other Soups, mostly without consent, and when the Seven's heinous private lives are leaked to the public and leveraged by the boys, Jack is the first to get the axe. He meets his end at the hands of Billy Butcher in a scene involving a knife and a psychotic breakdown. Butcher chokes him to prevent him from activating his invulnerability, stabs him repeatedly, and asks him why he killed his dog over and over again. But the real horror comes from the guy with the peacock attire outside the room who was just there to quote-unquote serve Jack. He sees him getting murdered and just closes the door. That alone should tell you why Jack was never fully adapted for the show, and given the implications of his fixation on trans sex workers, we're doubly glad we'll never see his ugly tan face. Malchemical. The prefix mal isn't used to denote good things. It's used to denote bad things, harmful things like malware, malfunctions, or in this case, Malchemical. A former member of Team Titanic, Malchemical is a parody of Metamorpho. If he weren't so depraved, perhaps he could have been a half-decent Soup. Sadly, he drinks from the same well as the rest of Vought's Soups, and Malchemical in particular is the worst of the worst. He was kicked out of Team Titanic because he used his abilities to trick its leader's girlfriend into having colonic coitus with him. He was then sent off to Jersey, where he was assigned to lead the most useless team in Vought's books, Super Duper. Super Duper was a group comprised of heroes that had powers without practical applications and mental disabilities, and upon arrival, Malchemical immediately started making fun of them. He was laughing at Clanker's Tourette's tics, and a guy like this can only be a monster. He later proved that when he shapeshifted into one of the team members to extract their female leader's weakness from her, and then turned into that exact weakness to terrify her, Vulgar. He also threatened to sexually assault her 2 other female co-workers, one of whom had borderline aphasia, and if Huey hadn't infiltrated Super Duper in time, Malchemical could have turned out to be worse than OG Noir. He was eventually burned alive by Butcher in one of the comic's more metal moments, but to us, it wasn't just diabolical, it was deserved. Blarney Cock. Blarney Cock is a character that won't even be referenced through Easter eggs, unlike Malchemical and many other characters on this list. That's because A, he's the illegitimate son of Queen Maeve and the legend in the comics, and B, his final scene is so disturbing and offensive that Amazon won't even risk the negative PR. Even before that scene unfolded, Blarney Cock was a racist, drug-addicted jerk who robbed children's hospitals for painkillers and lived a lifestyle as hedonistic as the rest of his teenage teammates. He eventually died during a confrontation with the boys when a recently V'd up Huey accidentally punched through his viscera. Blarney was brought back to life by Vought via a compound V revivification process that the show has completely removed, and perhaps this is the reason we won't see him at all, because he was supposed to return whole, but instead he turned into a zombie. He would constantly mumble incoherent words and urinate himself, with the Kicks members going so far as to use the R word to describe him, and his most infamous scene involves him obsessively trying to recover the hamster that was inside his rectum when he died. A reference to gerbling, which is a practice you really don't want to Google if you don't already know what we're talking about. Blarney was killed by Huey a second time because he'd started taking care of the hamster that popped out of his nethers the first time around, and we're just glad we won't have to see any of this play out on the show because Amazon will be steering clear of this without needing to be told. Reacher Dick. Mr. Fantastic is one of the most iconic and revered characters in the Marvel Universe, and with good reason. He's an upstanding guy with the most intellectual mind in the human realm. The same cannot be said for his boy's counterpart, Reacher Dick, who leads Fantastico and is a clear yet disturbing parody of both him and Plastic Man from DC Comics. In the Hero-gasm miniseries, he casually stretches his body across the soup orgy to investigate his teammate Doofer's corpse. Once he realizes that it's a drug overdose, he reports it to Homelander and gets back to doing whatever he was doing with Invisilass, the parody of Sue Storm in this universe. He treats a fellow soup's overdose and the ongoing sex party with equal indifference, and his name itself is a major factor in not adapting him for the series, because you know what Reacher Dick means, right? His whole stretchy power shtick used for sleaze is folded into Ezekiel's character by Eric Kripke, and at least Ezekiel had a purpose and a direction, however bad it might have been. Reacher Dick was literally included as a phallic joke, and the franchise is probably better off without him. Mr. Marathon. Before A-Train, the Seven's resident speedster in the comics and the show was Mr. Marathon. It's kind of like a Barry Allen, Wally West situation, except these two characters aren't related by blood or marriage. In the comic continuity, Mr. Marathon died during a failed attempt to stop 9/11, and no, we're not joking about that. The Flight 37 sequence in the show is already brutal, but the comic version is even nastier, with Marathon being killed and passengers being slaughtered as the Seven botch the rescue and inadvertently blow up the Twin Towers, while Homelander goes on an outright racist tirade. While the 9/11 reference will never make it into an American TV show for obvious reasons, Mr. Marathon just might, because in the show's continuity, he retired 4 years before A-Train joined. And based on the teasers and trailers for Season 5's, it looks like Jared Padalecki is playing his character. Still, the fact that this guy was one of the people responsible for America's greatest tragedy means that we will never see the original Mr. Marathon, and perhaps that's for the best. Sex Vicar. Sex Vicar appears in the Dear Becky spin-off as part of the Scorchers, a deliberately sex-themed British soup team. His outfit alone pretty much disqualifies him for adaptation because he wears white gloves, a Zorro-style mask, a clerical collar, and a G-string, nothing else. His name suggests that he's a Church of England-style vicar whose entire brand is mixing religion with sleaze, which was also the case for the rest of the Scorchers. While the show has replaced the comics' over-the-top gags about religious institutions being perverted with more grounded hypocrisy, Sex Vicar and his team's exclusion makes sense beyond that as well. Calling out the Catholic Church is one thing, but depicting them as an institution that promotes sexual liberation on a platform that's more readily accessible than comics is entirely different. Sex Vicar is eventually shown dead and beheaded after Butcher sabotages the Scorchers with poisoned food and sets up their bodies for Vought to discover in the exact arrangement of a Thanksgiving dinner table, and that's another good reason for their exclusion from the series. Nubia. In Diabolical, Nubia is depicted as an ambitious and tempestuous young woman who's a clear parody of the X-Men's Storm. Her relationship with her husband, Nubian Prince, is volatile to say the least, and when that doesn't work out, she joins American Hero in Season 3, which also doesn't work out because Supersonic wins instead of her. But despite all that, neither of those versions are the real Nubia, which we're glad about because the real Nubia's story makes us want to crawl out of our skin. She was one of serial child molester John Godolkin's original G-Men who tried to blow the whistle on his abuse and brainwashing protocol unsuccessfully. She's killed by fellow G-Men associate and Godolkin's personal assassin, Silver Kincaid. After he finds out that Vought can use Compound V to revive people, Godolkin steals the formula and uses it on Nubia, turning her into a semi-mindless zombie who wanders the G-Mansion whispering, "Kill me," all the time. This is how Huey and the rest of the boys figure out the process exists, as well as Godolkin's true nature, through a constant living reminder of the extremes he'll go to protect his abhorrent secret. Obviously, Gen V and the main show have so far avoided the resurrection subplot and Nubia's real story so far, and this is one scenario where not getting a perfect adaptation is a mercy. 5-0. If you thought Cyclops from the movies was a prick, then you haven't met his boys' counterpart yet, and it really shows. 5-0 is another G-Men member, a twisted version of Scott Summers who has the same powers, but is the complete opposite of him in just about every other way. 5-0 was quote-unquote raised by John Godolkin as one of the first ever G-Men, and by raised we mean he was kidnapped, brainwashed, and sexually exploited to make him loyal and obedient. When he isn't around John, he wants to kill the guy, but he'll also do whatever John says, because that's how deep his conditioning goes. The Boys uses him and the rest of the G-Men to mock not just superheroes, but also systemic cover-ups of abuse. And in 5-0's case specifically, that abuse also involves police brutality on minorities. See, 5-0's costume is completely based on American policemen's iconic navy blue uniform, and he acts like he lives in the segregation era because to call his views on black people appalling would be an understatement. Eric Kripke ditched the laser eyes and the goofy goggles and turned 5-0 into Blue Hawk, which worked a lot better for the series. And instead of showing these characters directly, Gen V sidesteps the entire original G-Men arc in favor of something more relatable and less traumatic. Professor Bonsai. Who enjoys seeing racial or ethnic stereotypes in today's society? We know we don't, and we'd venture to guess that a company as massive as Amazon doesn't either. That's probably why Professor Bonsai was left out of the TV series entirely, because everything about him screamed World War II anti-Japanese sentiment. His attire was borrowed from Silver Samurai, but his catchphrase, Bonsai, was taken from the phrase that Japanese kamikaze bombers used right before they executed their suicidal plane dives. That's something nobody really wants to remember in today's day and age, where America and Japan are close economic allies. Professor Bonsai was replaced by the soup terrorist Nakib in the series, whose ability to create explosions within his body is the same as Bonsai's, but everything else about him is completely different. We suspect Bonsai will remain a comic-only supervillain who was brutally murdered by Homelander, with his death being falsely spun into a self-destruction by Vought to protect their most valuable asset. Teen Temptress and Black Thug. These two might be the most uncomfortable aspects of the Scorcher's concept, because say what you will about Sex Vicar, at least his character only leaned into one awful stereotype. Teen Temptress and Black Thug, with 2 G's of course, open a can of worms that no studio in their right mind would want to touch, and their exclusion is more understandable than the Vicar's. Teen Temptress's character is built around the very real and pertinent current issue of sexualized teen imagery, and the fact that she's basically a blonde bimbo doesn't help Vaught's case, pardon the phrasing. She's the only female member of the Scorchers, which for a sex-themed group is already pushing the boundaries, but to make matters worse, she's even shown obsessing over breast augmentation that Vought pushed for her brand, going so far as to expose herself to executives in a meeting. Judging by her name and her naive nature, we wouldn't be surprised if Teen Temptress is actually a teenager, and boy oh boy does that make things that much worse. Then there's Black Thug, who's clearly supposed to be analogous to Luke Cage, but in the worst possible way, like if you missed the entire point of the character. The whole idea with the Scorchers was that they would start off as a sexually suggestive and provocative group that would later transition into a Vought-manufactured redemption journey, but here's the thing, that never happens. Black Thug's name and branding deliberately portrays him in the stereotypical image of an African-American male, implying that all those men are just thugs in general, and at this point, we think that excluding the Scorchers from the franchise was just a great idea overall. Because when you call a character Black Noir, it's a funny joke. When you call a character Black Thug, you're ringing a bell that just can't be unrung. Groundhog. Groundhog is one of the more memorable X-Men parodies from a design perspective. He's basically Wolverine if his hands were giant cartoonish hammers, and Garth Ennis made him that way because Wolvie is his least favorite superhero. He actually makes an appearance in The Boys Diabolical as a retired contracted supervillain who seems gruff but has a heart of gold. He acts as a foil for Nubian Prince and Nubia, and is actually friends with them and helps their daughter, Maya, reunite them when she seeks him out. Groundhog has a grounded struggle with alcoholism and rage as well, because who wouldn't if their hands were literal hammers? But in the comics, he was made to show how ridiculous and brutal the G-Men really are, as well as how much Garth Ennis hated the animal side of Wolverine's personality. He's the official team leader of the G-Men, but unofficially speaking, he's the guy that the G-Men are usually forced to clean up after. Groundhog in Diabolical can put together several consecutive coherent sentences, but in the comics, he keeps saying "gonna" like the feral beast he is. To drive home that point, Ennis has him cannibalize many of his victims and enemies in the comics, and that's definitely not something you can show on Amazon Prime, just like the OG Noir's crimes. This is why we believe the real Groundhog never made it to the platform, because there's no safe way to adapt his story. And while 7 on 7 does make a reference to him, we don't think we'll be seeing him beyond that little Easter egg. Critter, a Sasquatch-looking G-Man who's openly vulgar, racist, homophobic, and part of the same abusive Godolkin machine. Critter is an obvious analog for Beast from the X-Men. While he doesn't appear to be as intelligent or diplomatic as Hank McCoy, seeing as he's always stuck doing admin work and openly hates on John Godolkin for the same, there's a much darker aspect to Critter that often goes unnoticed by fans who have read the comics. Critter is often seen recording training sessions for the G-Men spin-off groups like G-Wiz, G-Coast, G-Style, you get the drill. He's also put in charge of the G-Mansion security for most of his page time, and his gripes with Godolkin aren't about the abuse he's been subject to, they're about how he's been making poor leadership choices, like allowing blacks and homos to establish entire teams. That's a personal issue for him because, like we said at the beginning of this entry, Critter is all kinds of terrible. But one character in The Boys revealed that Godolkin's abuse and brainwash protocol was something that some of the original G-Men partook in as well, and wouldn't you know it, Critter is exactly that. An original G-Man. Based on the fact that he hates John's leadership decisions, and not John himself, we'd venture to guess that he was one of, if not the only OG G-Man to participate in Godolkin's revolting rituals. And if that's true, then him being Beast's parody just became a lot darker and more literal than it ever needed to be. We're just glad he got eliminated by Vought, alongside the rest of the G-Men in the comics, and we'll probably never have to see him in the show because we don't think we can digest Bigfoot's likeness being dragged through the swamp that is the Critter personality. Whack Job. Whack Job is perhaps the most punk soup from the comics, with a mohawk on top of his head and a penchant for wearing leather vests and chained accessories. A close friend of Blarney Cock, he often accompanied his friend to those aforementioned children's hospitals to steal drugs and then consume them. In fact, Whack Job falls into a great depression when his best mate dies, and he's horrified upon his return as a zombie, but he's called Whack Job for a reason, and that reason is quite simple. His brains have been scrambled too much by his ability to control electricity. Whack Job's most iconic panel from the comics is the one where he's putting on a light show for the kids while Blarney's somewhere stealing the meds, presumably. And it's implied that this can go very wrong easily, which means that at some point, those electricity balls struck one of the kids and ended their life prematurely. But because he can't entirely protect himself from the effects of electricity, Whack Job's nervous system gets fried by it, and he ends up doing things that have earned him his soup name. And I mean, who wants to be backed up by a soup called Whack Job? If he does show up with the teenage kicks in Season 5, expect Homelander to make that same observation about him as well, which could very well snowball into a blind spot kind of situation. Basically, we're saying there's a decent shot that Whack Job gets whacked. And as of right now, that's our list. Let us know which one of these misfit soups you'd want to see the most in the series down in the comments below, and let us know if we missed anybody because, let's be real, there's no shortage of psycho soups in the Boys universe. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content to let us know you want to see more of it, and we'll see you guys real soon with yet another video. So until then, stay safe out there, and we'll see ya in the next one.